In the past 4 weeks, something unprecedented has unfolded in Washington that nobody saw coming. 5 Republican senators just voted to directly limit their own president's military authority. A Republican gubernatorial candidate quit his race, citing his party's actions. And approval ratings for a president 1 year into his second term have crashed to 42%. These aren't normal political disagreements. These are cracks forming in a party that has spent years standing united. The question everyone in Washington is asking right now is simple. How far will this go? I'm Alexander Rowan, and you're watching Alexander Rowan Reports. If you want to understand what's really happening inside the Republican Party right now, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our in-depth political analysis. What we're witnessing is not a full collapse, but it's not business as usual either. This is a party beginning to fracture under the weight of controversial policies that are testing the limits of party loyalty. From the streets of Minneapolis to the Senate floor, from Venezuela to the 2026 midterm campaign trail, Republicans are facing a moment of reckoning. And it all started on January 3rd with a military operation that would change everything. At 2 in the morning local time on January 3rd, 2026, American military forces launched Operation Absolute Resolve. The target was Caracas, Venezuela. The objective was to capture President Nicolas Maduro. Within hours, Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, were in American custody, being transported to New York to face narco-terrorism charges. President Trump announced at his Mar-a-Lago residence that the United States would temporarily run Venezuela until a proper transition could occur. The operation involved airstrikes on Venezuelan military infrastructure, a Delta Force raid on Maduro's compound, and months of CIA intelligence gathering. Between 40 and 80 people were killed in the operation, including Venezuelan military personnel, civilians, and Cuban security forces. Trump had given Maduro one final phone call, warning him to surrender. Maduro refused. The consequences of that refusal played out in explosions across Caracas that morning. This was the most audacious military action of either of Trump's terms in office, and it immediately sparked controversy in Congress. 5 days later, on January 8th, something remarkable happened on the Senate floor. 5 Republican senators voted with every Democrat to advance a war powers resolution. The resolution would limit President Trump's authority to conduct future military operations in Venezuela without congressional approval. The 5 Republicans who crossed party lines were Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Senator Susan Collins of Maine, Senator Todd Young of Indiana, and Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri. This was not Senate leadership. This was not Mitch McConnell, who is still serving but no longer the Republican leader. But it was significant. Senator Josh Hawley, representing deep red Missouri and often considered a Trump loyalist, voting to check presidential power sent shockwaves through Washington. The vote was 53 to 47. The measure is expected to pass final passage next week. President Trump responded immediately and furiously on Truth Social, writing that these senators should never be elected to office again. He specifically named all 5 and called the War Powers Act unconstitutional. This public rebuke of his own party members was extraordinary, but the Senate votes were just beginning. January 8th turned out to be a particularly difficult day for President Trump in Congress. The Senate War Powers vote wasn't the only defection. In the House of Representatives, 35 Republicans voted to override a Trump veto on a local infrastructure project. 24 Republicans voted to override another veto. Most significantly, 17 House Republicans joined Democrats to pass a 3-year extension of Enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies, which had expired on January 1st. The vote was 230 to 196. Trump had opposed the extension. These weren't isolated incidents. Throughout January, Republicans have been increasingly willing to vote against the president on specific issues. Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina used unanimous consent to force through a bill honoring law enforcement who defended the Capitol on January 6th. This came just days after the White House released a controversial timeline attempting to shift blame for the January 6th riot onto Capitol Police. These votes represent something important. They're not wholesale abandonment. They're not a coup. But they're Republicans in Congress asserting independence on specific policy disagreements. And it's happening more frequently than it did in Trump's first term. While Venezuela dominated headlines in early January, a crisis was building in Minneapolis. Operation Metro Surge, a federal immigration enforcement operation targeting the city, had begun in December 2025. On January 7th, Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers shot and killed Renee Good, a 37-year-old American citizen. Officers claimed she used her vehicle as a weapon. Bystander videos showed her turning away from officers before shots were fired. The shooting sparked immediate protests across Minneapolis. Thousands took to the streets, demanding federal agents leave the city. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz activated the National Guard to support local police. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey condemned the operation and promised legal action. But the federal operation continued. ICE and Border Patrol agents remained deployed throughout Minneapolis, conducting immigration enforcement activities. The Trump administration defended the operation as necessary to remove dangerous criminals. Critics argued it had crossed constitutional lines and was targeting communities of color. The tension continued to build, and 17 days after Renee Good was killed, Minneapolis would see another American citizen shot dead by federal agents. On the morning of January 24th, Alex Preddy was recording federal agents with his phone on Nicollet Avenue in Minneapolis. Preddy was a 37-year-old intensive care nurse working for the Department of Veterans Affairs. He had participated in protests against the killing of Renee Good earlier in the month. He had a legal permit to carry a concealed firearm. At approximately 9 a.m. local time, Border Patrol agents were conducting an immigration enforcement operation. Preddy stood near two women who were confronting the agents. An officer pepper-sprayed the women and Preddy. Multiple agents wrestled Preddy to the ground. Approximately 5 seconds later, two agents fired their weapons. 10 shots were fired in less than 5 seconds. Alex Preddy was declared dead at the scene. The Department of Homeland Security immediately issued a statement claiming Preddy had approached agents with a 9mm handgun and attacked them. Secretary Kristi Noem called it domestic terrorism. Stephen Miller referred to Preddy as a would-be assassin, but bystander videos verified by Reuters, BBC, The Wall Street Journal, ABC News, and CNN told a different story. The video showed Preddy filming with his phone before being shoved by an agent. They showed an officer taking Preddy's gun away before another agent shot him. There was no evidence Preddy brandished or used his weapon. The Alex Preddy shooting created something unprecedented. Bipartisan condemnation. Several Republican senators broke with the Trump administration's narrative. Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana called for a thorough investigation. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who had already voted against Trump on Venezuela, demanded answers. Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina wrote on social media that any administration official who rushes to judgment and shuts down an investigation does a disservice to the president and the nation. But what happened next was even more remarkable. Chris Madel, a Republican candidate for governor of Minnesota, withdrew from the race. Madel was a lawyer who had previously represented the ICE agent who killed Renee Good. In an 11-minute video, Madel explained his decision. He said he could not support national Republicans' stated retribution on Minnesota citizens. he said he could not be part of a party that would conduct operations this way. He noted that American citizens, particularly people of color, were living in fear and carrying papers to prove their citizenship. He called ICE home raids using civil warrants, signed only by Border Patrol agents, unconstitutional. This was a Republican candidate in a Republican-leaning race, walking away because of his own party's actions. The Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus, a pro-Second Amendment group, also called for a full, transparent investigation. Gun rights activists pointed out that Preddy was a legal gun owner exercising his constitutional rights. The Republican coalition was fracturing on an issue that should have unified them. On January 27th, 3 days after the shooting, a preliminary government review was shared with members of Congress. The review was from Customs and Border Protection's own internal assessment. It contradicted the Trump administration's public narrative. The CBP death notification made no mention of Preddy attacking officers. It made no mention of Preddy threatening anyone with his weapon. It described officers pepper spraying Preddy and 2 women. It described a struggle. It described 2 officers firing their weapons. Then it noted that after the shooting, an agent secured Preddy's firearm. The sequence mattered. The gun was taken from Preddy before or during the shooting, not before any alleged attack. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara confirmed Preddy had no criminal record beyond traffic tickets. Federal investigators blocked Minnesota state investigators from accessing the crime scene, despite a court-ordered search warrant. A judge issued a temporary restraining order, preventing Homeland Security from destroying or altering evidence. The Trump administration's credibility was being challenged by its own internal documents. Republicans in Congress, who were already concerned about Operation Metro Surge, now had evidence that the official story didn't match reality. By mid-January, 1 year into his second term, President Trump's approval rating had dropped to 42%. This represented a significant decline from where he started his second term. The Wall Street Journal poll showed him at 45%. Reuters Ipsos showed 41%. Real Queer Politics average across all polls showed 42%. Support among Republicans remained strong, but the opposition had calcified. More concerning for Republicans facing 2026 midterm elections, support among independent voters had eroded significantly. Trump's approval on immigration enforcement, once his strongest issue, had declined over the past year. The Alex Preddy shooting accelerated that decline. Economic concerns remained voters' top issue. Many Americans felt the country was on the wrong track. These numbers historically spell disaster for the president's party in midterm elections. Every president since World War II, except 2, has lost congressional seats in their first midterm. Trump himself lost the House in 2018. Republicans looking at these numbers and their own 2026 races were getting nervous. Some were starting to calculate whether tying themselves to Trump helped or hurt their re-election chances. The 2026 midterm elections present a challenging landscape for Republicans. In the House, Democrats need a net gain of just 3 seats to win the majority. Republicans currently hold 219 seats to Democrats' 213, with 3 vacancies. Historically, the president's party loses an average of 28 House seats in midterm elections. In the Senate, Republicans hold 53 seats to Democrats' 47, including 2 independents who caucus with Democrats. 33 Senate seats are up for election. Republicans are defending 22 seats. Democrats are defending 13. For Democrats to win Senate control, they need a net gain of 4 seats. Political analysts view Maine Senator Susan Collins as one of the most vulnerable Republicans. Collins, who voted against Trump on the Venezuela War Powers Resolution, represents a state Trump lost all 3 times he ran. Democratic Governor Janet Mills, who is term-limited, announced she's running for Collins' seat. North Carolina presents another opportunity for Democrats. Senator Tom Tillis announced his retirement during the Senate's work on Trump's legislative agenda. Former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper, who is popular in the state, is running for the seat. In Georgia, Republican Senator John Ossoff faces a difficult re-election in a state that has become increasingly competitive. Before the election, Republicans will first have to survive primary challenges. Some Trump-aligned candidates are primarying incumbents who have shown any independence. The political environment is creating exactly the kind of tension that can tear a party apart. By the end of December 2025, 54 members of Congress had announced plans to retire or run for different offices in 2026. This is a modern record for this point in the election cycle. It includes the most Senate turnover since 2012. 9 incumbent senators are not running for re-election. 44 incumbent House members are not running for re-election. 11 House members are running for governor of their states. 3 senators are running for governor. Many older Democrats are passing the torch to younger generations. But Republicans are also seeing significant departures. Some are reading the political winds and deciding this isn't the year to seek re-election. Some are frustrated with the direction of the party. Some see better opportunities in state races where they can distance themselves from national politics. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene resigned in early January following what was described as a public clash with President Trump over his second-term agenda and the release of files related to Jeffrey Epstein. The turnover creates uncertainty. New candidates are less tested. Open seats are more competitive. And every competitive race becomes a referendum on Trump's presidency. Republicans facing narrow majorities in both chambers cannot afford to lose many seats. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has navigated 3 government shutdown fights since Trump returned to the White House. His strategy has evolved. After a 43-day shutdown in the fall of 2025, the longest in American history, Schumer initially suggested Democrats wouldn't risk another shutdown. But in late January, he changed course. Democrats are now blocking funding for the Department of Homeland Security unless there are reforms to immigration enforcement operations. They specifically cite Operation Metro Surge and the killings in Minneapolis. Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut told reporters that Schumer is as aggressive as any Democrat in seeking remedies. He said Schumer feels in his gut the same outrage over what's happening in Minneapolis. This represents a calculated political gamble. Democrats believe immigration enforcement, once Trump's strongest issue, has become a liability. They believe images of American citizens being shot by federal agents in American cities will drive voters away from Republicans. They believe health care and immigration can be their winning issues in November. Polling suggests they may be right. Generic congressional ballot polling shows Democrats leading Republicans by 8 points on average. That's a margin that would give Democrats control of the House if it holds through November. The Republican Party's challenge is whether they can change this trajectory in the next 9 months, or whether the damage is already done. On January 6th, speaking to House Republicans at a policy retreat, President Trump made a stark prediction. If Republicans don't win the midterm elections, he will be impeached again. Trump told lawmakers they have to win the midterms because if they don't, Democrats will find a reason to impeach him. He acknowledged the historical pattern that presidents lose congressional seats in midterms. He questioned why this pattern exists, despite Republicans having better policy. Representative Maxine Waters of California had already suggested Trump's actions in Venezuela could warrant impeachment. She said Democrats cannot remain silent in the face of actions this extreme. Trump was impeached twice during his first term, once in 2019 over Ukraine, once in January 2021 after January 6. The threat of a third impeachment is driving Republican campaign strategy. Party operatives plan to use it to increase turnout in November. But it also reveals Trump's awareness of his political vulnerability. He knows the math. He knows the history. He knows that losing Congress means investigations, subpoenas, and potential impeachment. The question is whether that fear motivates his base or whether his controversial policies have already cost him too much support. Beyond the immediate political battles, serious constitutional questions hang over everything that's happened. Legal scholars are debating whether Operation Absolute Resolve in Venezuela was lawful under international law. The operation involved bombing a foreign country, conducting a military raid, capturing its president, and announcing the United States would run that country. Secretary of State Marco Rubio later walked back Trump's comments about running Venezuela. But the initial statement raised profound questions about executive power. The War Powers Resolution that 5 Republican senators supported would require congressional approval for future military action in Venezuela. But Trump has called the War Powers Act unconstitutional. He claims inherent executive authority to use military force. These competing visions of presidential power will likely end up in federal court. In Minneapolis, constitutional questions surround Operation Metro Surge. Critics argue that ICE conducting home raids with civil warrants signed only by Border Patrol agents violates the Fourth Amendment. They argue that American citizens being shot while exercising First Amendment rights to protest and record law enforcement violates basic constitutional protections. The Trump administration argues it has authority to enforce immigration law and that officers acted in self-defense. Federal courts will ultimately decide these questions. But politically, Republicans in Congress are caught between defending executive power and defending constitutional limits. That's not an easy position 9 months before an election. What we're witnessing is not the catastrophic collapse that some claim. It's not the end of the Trump presidency, but it's also not nothing. 5 Republican senators voting to limit their president's war powers is significant. A Republican gubernatorial candidate quitting over his party's actions is significant. Approval ratings dropping to 42% 9 months before midterms is significant. Internal government documents contradicting the White House narrative on a fatal shooting is significant. The question isn't whether Trump maintains complete control over the Republican Party. He still commands enormous loyalty from the base. The question is whether enough Republicans in enough places start making independent calculations about their own political survival. History tells us that midterm elections are brutal for the president's party. Current polling suggests 2026 will follow that pattern. Republicans could lose the House. Democrats have a narrow path to winning the Senate. Trump knows this. That's why he's already talking about impeachment. The next 9 months will determine whether Republicans can change this trajectory or whether the cracks we're seeing now become breaks that reshape the party. This story is far from over. If you want to stay informed on how this political situation develops, subscribe to Alexander Rowan Reports. Hit that like button if you found this analysis valuable. Comment below with your thoughts on what you think happens in the 2026 midterms. And share this video with anyone who wants to understand what's really happening in Washington right now. The choices Republicans make in the coming months won't just affect one election. They'll define the party for years to come. And we'll be here covering every development. I'm Alexander Rowan,